Malcolm had spent $12 million on specialists. His twins were still sick. Then a 33-year-old nanny saw what no doctor could, and what she discovered would shatter everything he believed. The iron gates of Thornwood Estate groaned open as Grace Mitchell's modest sedan rolled up the winding driveway. She had seen photographs of the mansion during her interview process, conducted entirely through an agency that specialized in placing caregivers with wealthy families, but nothing had prepared her for the reality that now loomed before her. The house rose from the manicured grounds like a monument to wealth, its grey stone facade punctuated by dozens of windows that reflected the October sky like cold, unblinking eyes. 3 stories of architectural grandeur, surrounded by gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. A fountain bubbled in the center of a circular drive, water cascading over marble cherubs into a pool so clear it looked like liquid glass. Perfectly trimmed hedges lined pathways that disappeared around corners she couldn't see, hinting at grounds that stretched far beyond what was visible from the driveway. Grace parked where the agency had instructed and sat for a moment, her hands still on the steering wheel. She was 33 years old, had spent 8 years as a pediatric nurse before everything fell apart, and now she was about to become a nanny for a billionaire's sick children. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had left medicine because she couldn't bear to watch any more children suffer, because the weight of all those small lives she couldn't save had finally crushed something inside her, and here she was, walking directly into a house that had been defined by childhood illness for 2 long years. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "First day. You've got this. Those boys are lucky to have you. Call me tonight and tell me everything." Grace smiled at the message, tucked the phone away and stepped out of the car. The October air carried the smell of fallen leaves and expensive gardening, fresh mulch, the last roses of the season, and something else underneath it all, something that made her pause. A faint antiseptic scent of medical equipment, barely perceptible but unmistakable to someone who had spent years in hospitals. It seemed to seep from the very walls of the estate, as if the house itself was sick. A woman in her 60s waited at the front entrance, standing beneath a portico supported by stone columns. Her grey hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her face carried the kind of weariness that came from years of witnessing things she couldn't change. Her uniform was crisp, a simple black dress with a white collar, but her eyes were soft, and when she extended her hand, her grip was warm and genuine despite the formal setting. She introduced herself as Rosemary, the head housekeeper. "Miss Mitchell, we've been expecting you." Her voice was warm but guarded, as if she was measuring every word against some internal standard. "The boys are with Dr. Strauss right now. Another evaluation." "Another one?" Rosemary's expression flickered with something Grace couldn't quite read. Frustration, perhaps, or resignation, or something deeper that she wasn't willing to name. "Mr. Davenport believes in being thorough." "Very thorough. Come. I'll show you to your quarters first, then we'll go over the protocols." Grace followed her through a grand foyer with marble floors that echoed with each footstep and a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a European palace rather than an American home. The ceiling soared 2 stories above them, painted with scenes of clouds and angels that must have taken years to complete. The air smelled of furniture polish and something antiseptic underneath, stronger now that she was inside. It reminded her of the hospital, not the sterile cleanness of an operating room, but the particular smell of a place where illness was constantly present, constantly being managed, constantly being fought against without ever being defeated. "How long have you worked for the family?" Grace asked as they climbed a sweeping staircase, her hand trailing along a banister that had been polished to a mirror shine by generations of hands. 27 years. I started when Mr. Davenport was just a boy himself, barely 10 years old and already so serious." Rosemary paused on the landing, catching her breath or perhaps her thoughts. Grace couldn't tell which. "I watched him grow up in this house. I was here when his father ran the company like a tyrant and expected Malcolm to be perfect at everything. I was here when he brought his bride home, so happy I thought he might finally escape the coldness he was raised in. And I was here when—" She stopped herself, her jaw tightening against words that wanted to escape. "Well, that's not my story to tell." They continued down a long hallway lined with paintings that Grace suspected were originals, not reproductions, landscapes and portraits and abstract pieces that probably cost more than her nursing salary for an entire decade. Each one hung in a gilded frame, perfectly lit by small gallery lights above. Rosemary stopped at a door near the end of the hall. "This is your suite. It's connected to the boys' rooms through that adjoining door there. Mr. Davenport wanted their caregiver close at all times, in case of emergencies." The room was larger than Grace's entire apartment back in the city. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in fabrics that looked impossibly soft and expensive. French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking the rear gardens, which stretched toward a line of trees in the distance. A sitting area with a small desk and comfortable chairs occupied the opposite corner, complete with a fireplace that looked like it actually worked. Everything was tasteful, expensive, and somehow cold, like a hotel room in a magazine that had never truly been lived in. "The protocols," Rosemary said, pulling a leather folder from a side table. "Mr. Davenport is very specific about the children's care." Grace opened the folder, and her eyebrows rose. The document was nearly 40 pages long, printed on heavy paper, and bound like a legal document. It was filled with schedules broken down to 15-minute increments, dietary restrictions that covered 3 full pages, medication times with dosages and cross-referenced charts, temperature monitoring requirements that had to be logged every 2 hours, approved activities listed in one column, and prohibited activities in another, and a list of emergency contacts that included 3 different specialists: a pediatric hospital on standby, an air ambulance service, and what appeared to be a medical evacuation company that specialized in transporting critically ill children. "This is comprehensive. Samuel and Daniel are very fragile," Rosemary said carefully, her eyes not quite meeting Grace's. "They've been ill since they were 2 years old, just after their mother passed." Grace looked up sharply. "What happened to her?" Rosemary's face closed like a door being shut against a storm. "An accident. Mr. Davenport doesn't speak of it. Neither should you." She moved toward the door, her posture suddenly stiff. "Get settled. Dr. Strauss should be finished with the boys in an hour. I'll come fetch you for introductions." After Rosemary left, Grace sat on the edge of the bed and began reading the protocols more carefully. The twins' symptoms were listed in clinical detail across several pages. Chronic fatigue that left them unable to play for more than 20 minutes at a time, recurring stomach pains that seemed to have no dietary trigger, episodes of difficulty breathing that could last anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour, night terrors that came almost every evening and left them screaming for parents who couldn't comfort them, appetite irregularities that had them refusing meals for days and then eating ravenously, and a general failure to thrive that had kept them below normal growth charts since their mother's death. They had been examined by 23 different specialists over 2 years: pediatricians, gastroenterologists, pulmonologists, neurologists, immunologists, geneticists, and more. They had undergone MRIs of their brains and bodies, blood panels that checked for everything from rare diseases to environmental toxins, genetic testing that mapped their entire genome, allergy screenings that covered hundreds of potential triggers, consultations with experts from 3 different countries who had flown in specifically to examine them, experimental treatments that required special FDA approval, dietary interventions designed by the world's leading nutritionists, and environmental modifications that had cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, new air filtration systems, hypoallergenic everything, water purification that exceeded hospital standards, $12 million in medical care, and no diagnosis. Grace had seen something like this before, during her years in pediatric nursing. Children whose bodies manifested symptoms that no test could explain. Children who were sick in ways that medicine couldn't quite reach because the sickness wasn't in their bodies at all. It was in their hearts, in the empty spaces where love should have lived, in the silence where words of comfort should have been spoken. She set the folder aside and walked to the adjoining door. It was unlocked. She pushed it open slowly, unsure what she would find on the other side. The children's wing was a world of soft colors and careful safety. 2 beds sat on opposite sides of the room, each surrounded by monitoring equipment that would have looked at home in a hospital ICU. Screens displayed vital signs in real time: heart rate, oxygen levels, temperature, and machines hummed quietly, ready to sound alarms at the slightest deviation from normal. Medical-grade air purifiers hummed quietly in every corner, their blue lights blinking steadily. The windows were fitted with special UV filtering glass. The carpet had been replaced with antimicrobial flooring. Everything, every single element of the room was designed to protect, to control, to prevent any possible harm from reaching these children. But there were signs of childhood too, if you knew where to look. On one of the beds lay a small stuffed elephant, worn from years of love. Its grey fabric was faded to almost white in places. One ear was missing some stitching and flopped at an odd angle, and its trunk had been re-sewn multiple times with thread that didn't quite match. Someone had loved this elephant desperately, had clung to it through endless doctor's appointments and sleepless nights. On the other bed, a blue blanket was bunched up in a nest shape, the kind of comfort object a child creates when there aren't enough arms to hold them. Grace touched the elephant gently, feeling the worn fabric under her fingers. "Who are you?" She spun around. Two small boys stood in the doorway, identical in their blonde hair and serious blue eyes. They wore matching pajamas despite it being early afternoon, blue flannel covered with tiny dinosaurs, and their skin had the pale quality of children who didn't spend enough time in the sunshine. Behind them stood a tall man in a white coat, Dr. Strauss presumably, and a younger man in an impeccably tailored suit whose face carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. Malcolm Davenport. "I'm Grace," she said, kneeling to be at eye level with the children. "I'm going to be helping take care of you." The twins looked at each other in that silent way twins sometimes communicated, an entire conversation passing between them in a single glance, questions asked and answered without a word being spoken. One of them, Samuel, she guessed, based on the subtle difference in how he stood, slightly forward and protective of his brother, turned back to her. "The other nannies went away," he said flatly. "How many have there been?" "Lots," the other twin said quietly. "Daniel." His voice was softer, more hesitant, and his arms were wrapped around his stomach in the way children do when something hurts inside that they can't name or fix. "Well," Grace said, "I'm not planning on going anywhere." Malcolm Davenport stepped forward. Up close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, purple and deep like bruises, and the tension in his jaw that came from clenching it too often. There was a slight tremor in his hands. Too much coffee and not enough sleep, or perhaps just the weight of worry that never quite went away. He was handsome in the way wealthy men often were, groomed and polished to perfection, every hair in place, his suit probably costing more than her car, but there was something hollowed out behind his gaze, something missing, something that had died and left an empty space where a person used to live. "Miss Mitchell, I trust you've reviewed the protocols." "I have, Mr. Davenport. They're very thorough. The boys require constant vigilance. Their health is—" He paused, searching for a word that would convey the full weight of his fear. "Precarious. Dr. Strauss visits 3 times a week for evaluations. Any changes in their condition, any changes at all, must be reported immediately to both myself and the medical team." "Of course." Dr. Leonard Strauss approached, his grey beard neatly trimmed, his expression professionally neutral in the way doctors learn to be when they don't have answers and don't want to admit it. "Miss Mitchell, I understand you have a nursing background. 8 years in pediatric care, 3 of those in the Children's Oncology Unit at St. Michael's Hospital. Impressive credentials. Though I should mention, the boy's case is quite unique. We've consulted with the best minds in medicine around the world, and their condition continues to puzzle us all. It's important that you follow the established protocols precisely. No freelancing, no alternative approaches, no well-meaning interventions that might interfere with our ongoing evaluation." Something in his tone raised Grace's hackles, but she kept her face pleasant. "I understand completely." Malcolm knelt down beside his sons, though he didn't touch them. His hands hovered near their shoulders, close enough to seem protective, far enough to maintain distance, but never made contact. "Samuel, Daniel, Miss Grace is going to be spending time with you from now on. I want you to be good for her. Follow the rules. Do what she says." "Yes, Daddy," Samuel said dutifully, his voice flat and practiced. Daniel said nothing. He was looking at Grace with an expression she couldn't quite read, searching, testing, hoping for something he couldn't name. His eyes held a question that his 4-year-old vocabulary couldn't form. "Are you different? Will you stay? Can you help us?" After the introductions, Dr. Strauss pulled Malcolm aside for a private conference in the hallway, their voices low and serious. Grace caught fragments, monitoring results, concerning patterns, recommend increased observation, but couldn't make out the full conversation. Rosemary appeared to help the boys with their afternoon rest, guiding them through a complex routine of temperature checks and symptom logging that they performed with the practiced ease of children who had done it 1,000 times before. Grace was left standing in the doorway, processing what she had just witnessed. Something was wrong here, not with the children, though clearly something was troubling them deeply. So something was wrong with the whole situation. The mountain of protocols designed to track every breath and temperature change. The endless specialists who kept finding nothing, but kept looking anyway. The way Malcolm Davenport looked at his sons like they were problems to be solved rather than children to be held, like equations that refused to balance no matter how many experts he threw at them. The way his hands had hovered but never touched, as if physical contact itself was dangerous. She thought about Daniel's eyes, the way he had studied her with an intensity that didn't belong on a 4-year-old's face, looking for something, testing whether she might be different from all the others who had come and gone, hoping, desperately hoping for something to change. And she thought about that worn stuffed elephant, loved almost to pieces, waiting alone on a bed in a room filled with medical equipment that cost more than most people's houses. What these children needed wasn't another treatment, or another specialist, or another round of tests that would find nothing. It was tenderness, it was presence. It was someone who would see them as children first and patients second. Grace walked back to her room and sat by the window, looking out at the immaculate gardens that stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere in this house, 2 little boys were going through yet another medical routine, their small lives measured in symptoms and schedules and protocols, their childhood disappearing one evaluation at a time. She had come here looking for a fresh start after everything that had happened. She hadn't expected to find a mission, but she had found one, and she wasn't going to fail them. The next morning, Grace began her first full day. According to the protocols, the boys were to wake at 7, have their vitals checked by a monitoring system that sent data directly to Dr. Strauss's office in real time, eat a carefully calibrated breakfast designed by a nutritionist who specialized in childhood immune disorders, take their morning supplements, 7 different pills and liquids that had to be administered in a specific order with precise timing, rest for 30 minutes to prevent any exertion-related symptoms, then begin light educational activities that had been approved by a child psychologist who had written 3 papers on medically fragile children. Their schedule was mapped out in 15-minute increments from the moment they woke until bedtime at 7:30, with no room for spontaneity or play or anything that resembled a normal childhood. Grace followed the morning routine precisely, watching the twins go through motions they clearly knew by heart. Samuel was compliant, answering questions politely in the flat tone of a child who had learned that resistance was pointless, eating what was put in front of him without complaint or enjoyment. Each bite was mechanical, required, joyless. Daniel picked at his food, his stomach already hurting according to the chart Grace was meant to fill out after every meal, a chart that had columns for intensity of pain, duration, location, and any potential triggers. Neither boy smiled. Neither boy laughed. Neither boy spoke unless asked a direct question, as if they had learned that silence was safer than speech. After breakfast, while the boys were supposed to rest in their room before educational activities began, Grace heard something that stopped her cold. Laughter. She crept to the doorway and peeked in, holding her breath so she wouldn't make a sound. Samuel and Daniel were under one of the beds, a blanket draped over them to create a makeshift tent that glowed with the soft light of a flashlight someone had smuggled in. Samuel was making explosion sounds with his mouth. Pew, pew, boom! While Daniel giggled so hard his whole body shook. Actually giggled, a sound so unexpected in this house that Grace felt her heart squeeze with something between joy and sorrow. For a moment, for one perfect moment, they looked like normal 4-year-olds, messy and silly and completely absorbed in imagination. Their faces were animated, their eyes bright, their bodies relaxed in a way Grace hadn't seen since she arrived. They were just boys playing a game, the way boys had played games since the beginning of time. Then Daniel coughed, just once, and everything changed. Samuel's face transformed instantly from joy to fear. "Danny? You okay? Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Daniel whispered urgently, pressing his hand over his mouth as if he could hold back any more coughs by force of will. "Don't tell. Please don't tell. They'll make me do the breathing thing again." Grace stepped back from the doorway, her heart aching with understanding. The breathing thing. She had seen the nebulizer equipment in their room, the collection of masks and tubes and medications that turned a simple cough into a 30-minute medical intervention. Another treatment, another procedure, another reminder that something was wrong with them, that they were broken in ways that couldn't be fixed, that even a moment of joy could lead to consequences. These children had learned that happiness was dangerous, That laughter led to coughing, led to treatments, led to more worry, led to more tests. They had learned to hide their joy like a shameful secret, to play only in stolen moments when no one was watching. And that, Grace realized, was perhaps the sickest thing of all. She waited a full minute before entering the room, making noise so they would hear her coming. Footsteps that could have been casual, a soft humming that gave them time to prepare. By the time she appeared in the doorway, both boys were lying properly in their beds, their expressions carefully blank, all evidence of joy erased as if it had never existed. The blanket fort was gone. The flashlight was hidden. They stared at the ceiling with the practiced stillness of children who had learned to become invisible. "Time for our morning activity," Grace said cheerfully, pretending she hadn't seen anything. "I thought we could do something fun today." "We're supposed to do the learning cards," Samuel said immediately, pointing to a stack of flashcards on the desk, educational cards designed to promote cognitive development without physical exertion. "For our brains." "We'll do those too. But first, I want to know, what do you like to play?" Both boys stared at her like she had spoken a foreign language. "Play," Daniel repeated, the word sounding strange in his mouth. "Yes? Games. Pretend. Things that are fun. What do you do when you're not doing medical stuff?" They exchanged one of their twin looks, a rapid-fire, silent conversation that Grace couldn't follow. Samuel shook his head slightly, a warning. Daniel bit his lip. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Playing makes us tired, and tired makes us sick," Daniel finished. It sounded rehearsed, like something they had been told so many times it had become truth. Grace felt something crack inside her chest. 4 years old, and they had already learned that joy was dangerous. 4 years old, and they measured their lives in symptoms instead of adventures. 4 years old, and they had never had the chance to just be children. "Well," she said softly, keeping her voice light despite the heaviness in her heart, "what if we played something very gentle? Something that won't make you tired at all?" She spent the next hour sitting on the floor with them, cross-legged on the medical-grade carpet, building a tower out of the wooden blocks she had found in a closet, still in their original packaging, never opened. A birthday gift that had been given and then forgotten because physical play wasn't on the protocol. The boys approached the activity with caution at first, moving slowly, watching her face for signs of disapproval, as if waiting for permission that might be revoked at any moment. But gradually, as Grace made silly sounds every time a block was placed, bloop, boing, shwoop, and celebrated each level of height with exaggerated amazement. 6 blocks high. That's practically a skyscraper. You two are architectural geniuses." Something began to shift. Their shoulders relaxed. Their movements became less careful. A light came into their eyes that hadn't been there before. Daniel smiled. Actually smiled. His whole face transforming into something bright and beautiful that made Grace want to cry and laugh at the same time. And his stomach, according to his own report when she asked, didn't hurt anymore. "It feels okay now," he said, sounding surprised by his own body. "It doesn't hurt." Grace noted this in the chart she was required to keep. She wrote it carefully, wanting the words to be clear, wanting someone, anyone, to notice what she was noticing. Symptom improvement during unstructured play. Stomach pain subsided after 20 minutes of building blocks. Child appeared happy and engaged. No interventions required. Recommend further observation of correlation between emotional state and physical symptoms. She wondered if anyone had ever written something like that before. If anyone had ever noticed that these children got better when they were allowed to be children, and worse when they were treated like patients. She suspected she knew the answer. Over the following days, Grace established her own rhythm within the confines of Malcolm's protocols. She followed the schedules and administered the supplements because she knew that defying the rules openly would only get her fired. But she also found small pockets of time for simple, quiet joy. Moments that weren't tracked or measured or logged in any chart. She read stories with voices. The dragon was always grumbly, the princess was brave, the wizard was a little bit silly. The boys would curl up on either side of her, pressed against her warmth, listening with their whole bodies. Sometimes Daniel would whisper along with his favorite parts. Sometimes Samuel would add his own sound effects. She let them help her arrange flowers from the garden in a vase, marveling at their choices and their careful concentration. "This one's yellow like the sun," Daniel would exclaim. "I want a red one. Red is the best," Samuel would counter. They would argue playfully about color choices, and Grace would let them, because arguing about flower colors was exactly what 4-year-olds should do. She sat with them during their rest time and hummed songs her grandmother used to sing, old lullabies about mockingbirds and cradles, about the moon and the stars, about children who were loved beyond measure. The boys would grow quiet and still, not from illness but from peace, their breathing evening out into the rhythm of children who felt safe enough to relax. And slowly, incrementally, miraculously, things began to change. Daniel's stomach pains became less frequent, from 5 or 6 episodes a day to just 1 or 2. He started eating more at meals, not because someone told him to, but because he was actually hungry. Samuel's episodes of difficulty breathing, which the charts showed happened almost daily before Grace arrived, occurred only twice that first week. His color improved. He moved more freely, less careful about every breath. Both boys began sleeping through the night without terrors, their monitors showing steady vital signs instead of the spikes and dips that usually accompanied their nightmares. No more screaming. No more middle-of-the-night emergency assessments. Just 2 little boys sleeping peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams healthy children dream. When Dr. Strauss arrived for his Wednesday evaluation, he frowned at the charts, scrolling through the data on his tablet with increasing puzzlement. "Their vitals look improved," he admitted reluctantly. "Sleep patterns are more stable. The breathing episodes have decreased. Daniel's gastrointestinal symptoms seem to be in remission. They seem happier," Grace offered carefully, watching his reaction. "More relaxed, more like children." Dr. Strauss peered at her over his reading glasses, his expression the particular kind of condescending patience that medical professionals sometimes directed at those they considered beneath their expertise. "Miss Mitchell, I appreciate your enthusiasm and your dedication to the boys' well-being, but these children have a complex, undiagnosed condition that has baffled specialists from multiple disciplines around the world. Their symptoms have waxed and waned before. I would caution against drawing conclusions from a few good days." "Of course, doctor. I didn't mean to suggest. The protocols exist for a reason. I would advise you to follow them precisely and leave the medical assessments to those qualified to make them." "Of course, doctor." But that night, as she tucked the boys into bed, a ritual she had quietly added to the schedule, even though it wasn't in the protocols, Daniel grabbed her hand. His small fingers wrapped around hers with surprising strength, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath his feet. "Gracie." "Yes, sweetheart." "You're warm," he said, looking up at her with those serious blue eyes. "Like," he frowned, struggling for words, his 4-year-old vocabulary insufficient for what he was trying to express. Something flickered across his face, a memory trying to surface, a feeling he couldn't quite name. "Like something. I don't remember." "Like what, Danny?" But he had already fallen asleep, his small fingers still wrapped around hers, his face finally peaceful in a way it never was during the day when doctors were watching and symptoms were being logged. Grace sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the twins breathe, slow and steady, peaceful. Not the ragged breathing of children in distress, but the deep, even rhythm of children who felt safe enough to let go completely. She thought about the protocols, 40 pages of schedules and restrictions and measurements, the endless tests, 23 specialists and $12 million, and still no answers. The desperate search for a diagnosis that continued to elude the best medical minds in the world. And she thought about a little boy who couldn't remember what warmth felt like, who had lost something so fundamental to childhood that he couldn't even name it anymore, who had been so surrounded by clinical care that he had forgotten what simple human love felt like. Something was very wrong here, and she was beginning to understand what it might be. But saying it out loud, that was going to be the dangerous part. 2 weeks into her position, Grace requested a meeting with Malcolm Davenport. She found him in his study, a cavernous room lined with books that looked like they had never been opened, leather-bound volumes collected for appearance rather than reading, their spines uncracked, their pages never turned. He sat behind a desk large enough to land a small aircraft, his attention fixed on documents that bore the logo of Davenport Industries. The room smelled of wood polish and old money, and the particular emptiness of a space that was used for work, but never for living. "Miss Mitchell." He didn't look up from his papers. "Is something wrong with the boys?" "No, sir. Actually, quite the opposite. Their symptoms have improved significantly." This got his attention. He raised his eyes, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, she saw something vulnerable flash across his face. Hope, raw and desperate and quickly suppressed, as if he was afraid to feel it, as if hoping for too much had already broken him once and he couldn't bear to risk it again. Dr. Strauss mentioned the charts looked better, but he cautioned against optimism. "Mr. Davenport, may I speak freely?" A pause. He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, giving her his full attention for the first time since she had walked through his door. "Go ahead." Grace took a breath. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, lying awake at night, choosing her words carefully, trying to find the exact combination that would make him listen. But now that the moment was here, the words felt fragile, inadequate to the task. "I've worked with many children over the years. Children with cancer who fought battles no adult should have to face and showed more courage than any soldier. Children with chronic illnesses who endured endless treatments with grace that humbled everyone around them. Children who were genuinely medically sick, whose bodies had turned against them through no fault of their own. And I've also seen children whose bodies express pain that medicine can't diagnose, because the pain isn't physical in origin." Malcolm's expression hardened, the vulnerability of a moment ago freezing over. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Samuel and Daniel may not have a physical illness at all. I believe their symptoms are psychosomatic, their bodies manifesting emotional distress as physical symptoms. It's more common in children than most people realize, especially children who have experienced significant trauma at a young age." "Trauma," Malcolm repeated flatly, the word landing like a stone. "They lost their mother when they were 2 years old. That's an incredibly formative age." "Thank you, Miss Mitchell." His voice had gone cold, all trace of vulnerability frozen solid. "I'm well aware of what my children have been through, and I've spent more money than you'll earn in your lifetime trying to help them." "Are you seriously suggesting that 23 of the world's leading specialists missed something you discovered in 2 weeks?" "I'm suggesting that 23 specialists were looking in the wrong place. They were looking at bodies when they should have been looking at hearts." Malcolm stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made Grace flinch. "Doctor, Strauss is one of the most respected pediatric specialists in the country. He has devoted 2 years to this case. He has consulted with experts on 3 continents. He has run every test known to modern medicine. And in 2 years, the boys haven't gotten better. They've gotten worse, more withdrawn, more anxious, more fragile. But in 2 weeks of simply being present with them, playing with them, giving them attention and warmth, their symptoms have improved dramatically. Mr. Davenport, doesn't that tell you something?" "It tells me that symptoms fluctuate," as Dr. Strauss explained. "It tells me that you're reading too much into temporary improvement." Grace stepped closer to his desk, refusing to be intimidated by his wealth or his anger, or the vast expanse of mahogany between them. "Mr. Davenport, when was the last time you held your sons?" The question hit him like a physical blow. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles went white, the way something flickered in his eyes that looked almost like pain. "They're fragile," he said through clenched teeth. "Physical contact has to be careful, monitored. The protocols clearly state they're 4 years old. They need to be hugged without someone logging it on a chart. They need to roughhouse and be tickled and fall down and get back up again. They need their father to carry them on his shoulders just because it's fun, not because it's prescribed. They need their daddy to tuck them in at night, not because a protocol says so, but because he wants to, because he loves them and wants to be close to them." "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I have every idea. I spent 8 years watching children fight for their lives. I held their hands while they went through chemotherapy. I wiped their tears when treatments made them sick. I saw parents who would give anything, anything at all, for one more day with their child. And your sons aren't sick, Mr. Davenport, not in the way you think. They're heartbroken. They're lonely. They've learned that being ill is the only way to get attention in this house, the only way to make anyone pay attention to them at all." Malcolm's face flushed with anger. "You've overstepped, Miss Mitchell, significantly." "I know. But someone needed to say it. Someone needed to tell you the truth, even if you don't want to hear it." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the vast expanse of his desk. A billionaire and a nanny, a father in denial, and a woman who had seen too many children suffer to stay silent. Grace's heart pounded in her chest, but she held her ground. She had known this might cost her the job. She had known he might throw her out. But those little boys deserved someone willing to tell the truth. Finally, Malcolm spoke. His voice was quiet now, almost dangerous. "I think you should leave this room now. Mr. Davenport, not permanently, not yet. But leave. We'll discuss your continued employment when I've had time to consider what you've said. Grace nodded slowly. She had expected this, prepared for it. Before I go, she said, pausing at the door, there's one more thing. Ask yourself why the boys played doctor with each other, why they put stethoscopes to each other's chests and pretend to listen for heartbeats. They're rehearsing the only kind of care they understand. Clinical care, medical care, professional care. The only way they know how to be close to someone is to pretend to examine them. Think about what that means. She left without waiting for a response, her heart pounding, her hands trembling, praying that something, anything she had said would break through the walls he had built around his heart. That night, Grace didn't sleep. She lay in her room, listening for sounds from the children's wing, wondering if she had just destroyed any chance of helping them. Every creak of the old house made her heart jump. Every distant sound had her sitting up, straining to hear. But as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, she heard something unexpected. Footsteps in the hallway, heavy ones, a man's stride, Malcolm's. She heard his door to the children's room open with a soft click, and then soft enough that she almost missed it through the walls. "Daddy?" "Shh. Go back to sleep, Samuel. I wanted to check on you. You never come at night. You never come to our room." A long pause. The silence stretched so long that Grace thought maybe she had imagined the whole thing. "I know," Malcolm said finally, his voice rough with something that sounded like grief. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Grace pressed her hand to her heart and let herself hope. But she had no idea how much worse things would get before they could get better. The morning after Grace's confrontation with Malcolm, Dr. Strauss arrived for an unscheduled visit. She watched from the hallway as he disappeared into Malcolm's study, the door closing firmly behind them, with a sound that reminded her of a jail cell locking shut. Through the heavy door, she could hear the muffled sound of voices, Dr. Strauss's measured professional tones, Malcolm's deeper responses. The conversation went on for over an hour while Grace waited, her stomach tightening with every passing minute. Finally, Malcolm summoned her. "Miss Mitchell, I've consulted with Dr. Strauss about your observations." Malcolm's tone was clinical, distant, all trace of the vulnerable man who had visited his sons in the night completely erased. While he acknowledges that the boys have shown some improvement, he believes this is a natural fluctuation and that we should proceed with a more intensive treatment protocol. Grace felt her stomach drop. What kind of protocol? Dr. Strauss operates a specialized pediatric center about 40 minutes from here, the Strauss Institute for Childhood Wellness. He's recommended that Samuel and Daniel spend 2 weeks there for comprehensive evaluation and treatment in a controlled environment. You want to hospitalize them? It's not hospitalization. It's a therapeutic residence, state-of-the-art facilities, round-the-clock monitoring. Dr. Strauss believes immersive intervention is the next logical step. Mr. Davenport, these children don't need more intervention. They need less. They need normalcy. They need love. Malcolm raised his hand. Dr. Strauss has been caring for these boys for 2 years. You've been here 2 weeks. I'm going to follow his recommendation. And if I'm right, if you take them away from everything familiar and subject them to more tests, what do you think that will do to them? It will help them get better. It will make them worse. Grace heard her voice rising. "Please, give me 1 more week." For a moment, something wavered in his eyes. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and whatever had been there was gone. "The boys will leave for the Institute on Friday." "That's my decision." Grace left feeling like she was walking through water. 3 days. She had 3 days before Samuel and Daniel would be taken to some sterile facility where their hearts would continue to break. She needed answers. She needed to understand what had really happened to Caroline Davenport. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Grace knocked on Rosemary's door in the staff quarters. The older woman opened it with surprise. "Miss Mitchell, is something wrong? Can I come in? I need to ask you something important." Rosemary hesitated, glancing down the hallway. Then she stepped aside. Her room was modest but comfortable, filled with photographs showing younger versions of Rosemary with various members of the Davenport family over the decades, birthdays, holidays, moments of joy from a different world. "You've been with this family for 27 years, Grace began. "You knew Caroline." Rosemary's face went carefully blank. "I did." "What was she like?" A long pause. Rosemary moved to her window and looked out at the dark gardens, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "She was sunshine," she said finally. "When Mr. Malcolm brought her home, It was like the house finally woke up after years of sleeping. She had this way of making everyone feel seen, really seen, like you mattered, like your thoughts and feelings were important. The staff, the groundskeepers, even Mr. Malcolm's father, who was a cold and difficult man. She'd sit in the kitchen with me and help shell peas just to have someone to talk to. Used to say the big rooms felt too empty when she was alone. What happened to her? I told you. An accident. Rosemary. Grace stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. Those boys are being sent away on Friday to some institute where they'll be poked and prodded and treated for a disease they don't have. I know something is wrong here. I know their symptoms aren't physical. But I need to understand what broke them in the first place, what broke this family. Rosemary turned to face her. Her eyes were wet with decades of held-back grief, finally threatening to spill over. You're asking me to betray confidences I've kept for years. I'm asking you to help save those children. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, Rosemary sat heavily on the edge of her bed, as if the weight of what she was about to share was too much to bear standing. Caroline didn't have an accident, she said quietly. Not the way people mean when they say that. What do you mean? She was found in her car, in the garage. The engine was running. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. She took her own life. That's what the official report said, but the family covered it up, told everyone it was a heart condition, a genetic defect no one could have predicted. Mr. Malcolm was destroyed. He blamed himself. And maybe he should have. What do you mean? Rosemary reached into her nightstand and pulled out a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. Inside were several envelopes, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. Caroline wrote these in the months before she died. She gave them to me for safekeeping. Said if anything ever happened to her, someone should know the truth. Grace took the letters with trembling hands. Have you read them? Every word. They broke my heart. They still do, every time I think about them. Why didn't you show them to Malcolm? Because I was afraid. Because the truth is ugly and I thought I was protecting him, protecting the family, protecting those boys from knowing what really happened to their mother. Rosemary's voice cracked. But watching those boys suffer these past 2 years, watching everyone look everywhere except at what's right in front of them, I can't do it anymore. I can't keep this secret while those children wither away. Grace opened the first letter. The handwriting was elegant but unsteady, the words of a woman trying to hold herself together while falling apart. My dearest Samuel and Daniel, I'm writing this because I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything is fine. Your father loves you. I truly believe that with all my heart, but he doesn't know how to show it. He thinks providing for us is the same as being present with us. He thinks success is measured in numbers and achievements, and the size of bank accounts, not in moments of connection, not in the small everyday kindnesses that make a life worth living. I have tried so hard to be enough for all of us, to be the warmth he can't give, to fill the silence he leaves behind when he disappears into his work for days at a time. But I'm tired. So tired of loving someone who looks right through me like I'm made of glass. I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You are perfect. You are my greatest joy, the reason I get up every morning, the reason I keep trying. And if something happens to me, I need you to know that you are worthy of love. Real love. The kind that shows up. The kind that holds on even when things are hard. Don't let anyone tell you that you're broken. Don't let anyone treat you like a problem to be solved. You are my heart. Mom Grace's hands were shaking by the time she finished. There were more letters, 3 more, each one documenting Caroline's increasing isolation, her desperate attempts to connect with a husband who was always working, always providing, never present. The second letter described birthday dinners eaten alone because Malcolm had emergency meetings that couldn't wait. It talked about the nursery she had decorated by herself because Malcolm was too busy to help choose colors or hang pictures. She had sat there alone after the twins were born, she wrote, feeling more like a single mother than a wife, wondering if Malcolm even noticed she existed. The third letter was darker, talking about days when she couldn't get out of bed, when the silence of the big house felt like it was swallowing her whole. She wrote about calling Malcolm's office and being told he was in meetings, always in meetings, and how she had stopped calling because the rejection hurt too much. The final letter was dated 3 days before her death. I keep waiting for him to see me. To really see me, but I've become invisible in my own home. I walk through these beautiful rooms and feel like a ghost haunting my own life. Even when he's here, he's somewhere else. His mind on the company, on the next deal, on the next achievement, on anything but us. The boys are the only light left. When they smile at me, when they reach for me with their small hands, I remember what love feels like. But I'm so afraid I'm not strong enough to keep being their light. I'm so afraid the darkness is winning. I'm so sorry." "She died of loneliness," Grace whispered, tears streaming down her face. "In a mansion full of people, surrounded by wealth most people can't even imagine. She died because no one was paying attention, because the one person who should have seen her refused to look. And now her boys are sick with the same disease," Rosemary said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "They lost their mother, and then they lost their father to grief. He couldn't face them. Every time he looked at them, he saw her. So he buried himself in work and hired specialists to do the caring he couldn't do himself. The only time he pays attention to them now is when something's wrong with them medically. So something is always wrong." Grace understood now. Everything clicked into place with terrible clarity. The psychosomatic symptoms, the constant illnesses. Samuel and Daniel had learned in the way that only children can learn, that sickness equaled attention, that being broken was the only way to be seen, that if they were well, no one would look at them at all. And every specialist, every test, every treatment only reinforced the lesson. Every time they were sick, doctors came. Their father appeared briefly to consult and worry. People paid attention to them, and when they were well, they were alone again. "I need to show these to Malcolm," Grace said, clutching the letters. "He won't listen. He couldn't face the truth 2 years ago. He can't face it now. He has to. Those boys are running out of time." Rosemary looked at her with something like hope mixed with fear. "You really think you can reach him?" Grace thought about Malcolm's face when she'd asked when he'd last held his sons, the way he'd flinched like she'd struck him, the way he'd visited them in the night, thinking no one knew, standing in the doorway of their room like a ghost himself. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I have to try." She stayed up all night reading Caroline's letters over and over until she knew them by heart. She felt like she was getting to know a woman she had never met, a woman full of love and hope who had slowly been erased by loneliness. When morning came, Grace was exhausted but certain of what she needed to do. But Malcolm was not ready to listen. She found him in the foyer, directing staff as suitcases were loaded into a sleek black van. The boys stood beside Dr. Strauss, already dressed in their traveling clothes, matching blue outfits that made them look like small, sad soldiers going off to war. Daniel was crying silently, tears streaming down his cheeks, while he clutched his worn stuffed elephant to his chest so hard his knuckles were white. Samuel had his arm around his brother, his small face set in grim resignation, a 4-year-old who had already learned that protesting was useless, that adults would do what adults wanted regardless of what children felt. "Mr. Davenport," Grace ran toward them. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." "Not now, Miss Mitchell. We're leaving for the Institute. It's about Caroline." Malcolm froze. The blood drained from his face, and for a moment he looked like a man who had seen a ghost, which, in a way, he had. "I have her letters, the ones she wrote before she died. I know what really happened, and I know why your sons are sick." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the staff stopped moving, frozen in place like figures in a tableau. "How dare you?" Malcolm's voice was barely a whisper. "Daddy!" Samuel's voice was small, confused. "Why is Gracie upset? Go with Dr. Strauss to the car, boys." "Malcolm, please, just read them. Just listen to what she was trying to tell you." Dr. Strauss stepped forward, his professional demeanor firmly in place. "Mr. Davenport, I think it's clear that Miss Mitchell has become emotionally over-involved in this case. Perhaps it would be best if she were relieved of her duties immediately." "Yes," Malcolm said tightly. "Perhaps it would." "Daddy, no!" Daniel broke away from Dr. Strauss and ran to Grace, throwing his arms around her legs with desperate strength. "Don't make Gracie go. She's warm. She makes my tummy not hurt. Daniel, come here." "No." The little boy was crying harder now, his whole body shaking with sobs. "I don't want to go to the hospital place. I want to stay with Gracie. She plays with us. She does the voices in the stories." Samuel joined his brother, wrapping himself around Grace's other leg. "Please, Daddy. Please don't send us away. We'll be good." "We promise we'll be good." Malcolm looked at his sons, really looked at them, for what might have been the first time in months. 2 small boys, 4 years old, clinging to a woman they'd known for barely 3 weeks, begging not to be sent to another facility, another round of treatments. 2 children who had found something they desperately needed and were terrified of losing it. and something in him cracked. "Everyone out," he said hoarsely. "Dr. Strauss, take the van back. The boys aren't going anywhere today. Mr. Davenport, I strongly advise—" I said out. The staff scattered like leaves before a storm. Dr. Strauss opened his mouth to protest, his face flushing with indignation, but something in Malcolm's expression made him think better of it. He retreated with what remained of his professional dignity intact. When they were alone, Malcolm, Grace, and two small boys who still hadn't let go, the silence was absolute. "Show me the letters," Malcolm said. Grace handed them over with trembling hands. She took the boys to the library while Malcolm read. It was a room they had always been told not to enter, because the books were valuable and the furniture was antique. But today, Grace settled them on the big leather couch and let them climb all over her while she read stories about brave knights and magical animals and children who went on great adventures. When Daniel fell asleep with his head on her lap, his elephant tucked under his arm, and Samuel curled up against her side, his breathing finally steady and calm, she didn't move. She just held them, these two small boys who had been through so much, and she waited. 2 hours later, the library door opened. Malcolm stood in the doorway, Caroline's letters clutched in his hand. His face was devastated, raw, human in a way Grace had never seen. His eyes were red-rimmed, his cheeks wet with tears he hadn't bothered to wipe away. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world collapse, which, in a way, he had. "I did this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I killed her, and I'm killing them." "No." Grace spoke softly, not wanting to wake the boys. She was struggling with something bigger than any one person could cause or cure. Depression is an illness, Malcolm. It lies to people. It tells them they're alone even when they're not. But you can choose differently now. You can choose to be present. I don't know how. The confession seemed to cost him everything. My father never... I was raised to provide, to succeed, to build things and achieve things and never ever show weakness. Emotion was weakness. Affection was indulgence. I don't know how to be what they need. I never learned. Then learn. They'll teach you. Children are remarkably patient with parents who are trying. Malcolm approached the couch slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter the scene before him. He looked at Samuel curled up like a comma against Grace's side, his small hand resting on her arm. At Daniel, whose face in sleep was finally peaceful, his fingers wrapped around his elephant's trunk. "They're so small," he whispered. "I forget how small they are, how fragile, not because they're sick, but because they're children, because they need things I don't know how to give." "Sit with us," Grace said. "I don't want to wake them. They won't mind, I promise." Carefully, awkwardly, Malcolm lowered himself onto the couch beside his sons. The leather creaked beneath him. Samuel stirred, opened his eyes, and saw his father sitting beside him. Not across a desk, not on a video call, not rushing through on his way to a meeting, but actually sitting there close enough to touch. "Daddy? Hey, buddy. Are you staying?" Malcolm's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Yeah, I'm staying." Samuel shifted his small body and curled up against his father's side, just as he'd been curled against Grace. The movement was so natural, so instinctive, a child seeking the comfort he had been denied for so long. Within moments he was asleep again, his small hand resting on Malcolm's arm. Malcolm sat perfectly still, tears streaming down his face, one hand hovering over his son's back like he was afraid to touch something so precious, so breakable. "You can hold him," Grace said gently. "He won't break." Malcolm's hand descended slowly, carefully. His palm settled between Samuel's small shoulder blades, and a sob escaped him, a sound of grief and relief and terrible recognition all mixed together. "I've been so stupid," he whispered. "So blind. I was so busy trying to fix them that I never stopped to ask what they actually needed." "You were doing what you thought was right. You were trying to fix them because fixing things is what you know how to do. It's what you were taught. But they're not broken. They just miss their mum and they miss you." Daniel stirred now, woken by the sound of his father's voice. He blinked up at Grace, still half asleep, then looked over to see Malcolm with his arm around Samuel. "Daddy's crying," Daniel observed, his voice curious rather than frightened. "Grown-ups cry sometimes," Grace said, "when they feel big feelings." Daniel considered this with the serious thoughtfulness of a 4-year-old processing new and important information. Then, slowly, he crawled across Grace's lap and into his father's arms. Malcolm gathered both boys against him and wept. It was an ugly cry, the kind of crying that comes from years of held-back grief finally released, from walls finally crumbling, from a heart finally breaking open. His shoulders shook, his breath came in gasps, and through it all his sons held on to him, their small arms wrapped around him, as if they could keep him from falling apart by sheer force of love. Grace slipped quietly from the library, giving them privacy. In the hallway, she found Rosemary waiting, her face anxious. What happened? He read the letters, and Grace looked back at the closed library door. Through the thick wood, she could hear the muffled sound of Malcolm talking to his sons. The words were indistinct, but the tone was different, softer, present, human. I think he finally woke up. The following weeks were a transformation, unlike anything Grace had witnessed in her years of nursing. Dr. Strauss was gone. His institute was never mentioned again. The protocols were dismantled page by page, replaced with something simpler. Be present, pay attention, love without conditions or schedules. It wasn't easy. Malcolm had spent his entire life building walls around his heart, and dismantling them took time and patience, and more than a few stumbles. There were setbacks, moments when old habits surfaced, and he retreated into work or clinical detachment. Evenings when Grace found him in his study, staring at spreadsheets instead of reading bedtime stories, and had to gently remind him where he was needed. But every time he started to pull away, one of the boys would do something to pull him back. "Daddy, look what I made!" Samuel would run in with a drawing of their family, 4 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. "Daddy, can you do the dragon voice?" Daniel would ask, holding up a storybook, his stomach mysteriously pain-free. "Daddy, will you lie down with us until we fall asleep?" And every time Malcolm said yes. Every single time. The boy's symptoms began to fade like morning mist under a warming sun. Daniel's stomach pains disappeared entirely within a month. Samuel's breathing episodes stopped. The night terrors that had plagued them for 2 years became rare, then non-existent. The monitoring equipment was removed from their room, replaced by bookshelves and a train set that Malcolm assembled himself, reading the instructions wrong twice and laughing at his own mistakes instead of hiring someone else to do it. One evening, about a month into the transformation, Grace found Malcolm in the garden, kneeling in the dirt. He was planting something, actually planting, with soil under his fingernails and sweat on his brow. "I never learned how to garden," he admitted when she approached. "Caroline used to do it. I'd watch her sometimes from the window of my study. I'd watch her and think I should go help. But there was always another call, another meeting, another urgent matter that wasn't really urgent at all." "What are you planting?" "Roses. Her favorite." He sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on trousers that probably cost more than Grace's monthly salary, now ruined with dirt. He didn't seem to care. "I had them all removed after she died. I couldn't bear to look at them. But the boys should grow up knowing what their mother loved. They should see her roses bloom every spring. She would have liked that. She would have liked you." Malcolm looked up at her. "She would have liked that someone finally told me the truth I didn't want to hear." Grace helped him finish planting the roses. They worked in comfortable silence as the sun set, and when they were done, they stood together looking at the new row of bushes that would bloom in the spring. "The boys have been asking about Caroline," Malcolm said, "about their mother. I never know what to say. Tell them the truth, that she loved them more than anything, that she struggled with sadness that became too heavy to carry, and that it wasn't their fault. It was never their fault. Children can handle truth, Malcolm. What they can't handle is silence." He nodded slowly. "Will you help me when they ask?" "Of course. Always." The months that followed were a masterclass in learning to be human again for all of them. Malcolm learned to play. Actually play. Getting down on the floor with his sons and building elaborate block fortresses that would be destroyed with gleeful violence. He learned to read stories with voices, though his dragon was more silly than scary, and his princess sounded suspiciously like his secretary. He learned to be present, to put down his phone, to close his laptop, to look his children in the eyes when they spoke to him. And the boys blossomed. Samuel, no longer needed as his brother's protector, relaxed into the carefree joy that should have been his birthright. He discovered he loved to draw, covering page after page with colorful scenes from his imagination. Daniel, freed from the burden of physical symptoms that had defined his existence, became curious about everything: bugs in the garden, clouds in the sky, how bread rose in the oven when Rosemary let him help with baking. They still played doctor sometimes, But now it was different. Now it was just imagination, not rehearsal. Healing stuffed elephants and teddy bears with magic bandages and silly songs. And they started calling Grace Mama. It happened gradually, then suddenly. First Daniel slipping up during a moment of excitement when she caught him as he jumped off a step. Then Samuel testing it out, watching her face to see if it would be allowed. And they started calling Grace Mama. Grace looked at Malcolm uncertain, and he nodded, his eyes bright. If that's what they want, if it's what you want. Yes, she whispered. It's what I want. 1 year after Grace arrived, Malcolm asked her to marry him in the garden beside Caroline's roses. I want us to be a real family, he said down on one knee. Say yes, Mama, Daniel shouted. Yes, 1,000 times yes. At the wedding, Samuel tugged his father's jacket. Daddy, are we fixed now? Malcolm knelt down. We were never broken, Samuel. We just got lost. But we found our way back. 2 years later, Grace stood in the garden with a baby on her hip, a little girl named Caroline. Samuel and Daniel, now 6, ran through the roses laughing. Malcolm emerged with lemonade. Happy. Impossibly so. Grace leaned against him, watching their family. She had found home, healed not by medicine but by love, not by millions of dollars, but by moments of presence. If this story touched something inside you, leave a comment. Sometimes naming what we feel changes more than we imagine. Your comment may help someone who's silently struggling today. The end.